radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Fade to Black. How you doing? Today is Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, we've got screenwriter, author Mark O'Connell on tonight with us. He's back with us, and we're going to be talking about the strange life of J. Allen Hynek and his UFO career. We're going to be getting into that very deeply. And we're also going to talk some Star Trek tonight and his experience for writing some of Star Trek episodes. And he has written for Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, of which the DS9 episode Who Mourns for Morn was named by Hugo-winning science fiction writer Charlie Jane Anders as number 72 on the IO9.com list of the top 100 Star Trek episodes of all time. And I'm going to get straight to it tonight with Mark. I could go into a long bio and all of that. I'm more interested in saying good evening and how you doing with the writer's strike?
That's a great question to lead off with. Hi, Jimmy.
That is
great to be here.
Yeah. It's good to talk and see you again, Mark. Are you affected by the writer's strike?
Yeah, I am actually, and unfortunately, I have not because I spend most of my time now in Savannah, Georgia. I haven't yet had an opportunity to join any of the picket lines because here in Georgia, the picket lines are all up in Atlanta, which is 200 miles to the west of here. So I haven't really been able to participate in the strike. I'm hoping to do so next week. I'm going to be in Atlanta for a couple days. And I'm hoping that I can join up with some of my Writers Guild comrades and do some picketing. But it has affected me in kind of a funny way. Shortly before the strike began, which I believe we're on like day 50 now. Shortly before the strike began, I got some interest from a movie producer about a movie script of mine, this latest script I've written. And he had seen the pitch line on the Writers Guild website and asked to see the script. So I sent him the script. He had the script for a week or two. Then all of a sudden the strike hits and I get a list of rules and regulations from the Writers Guild as to what to do and what not to do if you're picketing or if you're active with any projects. And one of the rules was whoever you've sent a script to, you need to call them up and ask them to immediately either return the script if it's a hard copy or delete it if it's an electric copy. And sure enough, so I had to send an email to this producer and be like, this is a little awkward, but could you please destroy and or delete any copies of that script that may be in your offices, because you can't look at that now and we can't talk about it now until this whole thing is resolved. So, it just kills me right out of the gate. I get a message of interest from a producer and immediately, boom, that gets shut down because of the strike. But I'm not complaining about the strike. I totally support the strike. I've been a lifetime member of the Writers Guild since the 1990s. The Writers Guild has been a fantastic resource for me over the years. Every 3 months, I get a Star Trek residual check, and that's because of the Writers Guild. The Writers Guild is making sure that CBS sends that check out, every quarter. So yeah, we're fighting a good fight. I hope we prevail, because really the streaming video thing, now that doesn't affect me a whole lot. But the streaming video thing is kind of killing us. There's so much money coming into the studios, and they're not sharing it with the writers who made those shows possible to begin with. So
Yep.
yeah,
And just like with any strike, I can totally understand both sides. I totally can. You got to figure out a way to meet in the middle. I understand both sides. But do you know who I feel really bad for? Starbucks. Starbucks. There's no writers hanging out there signing into the Wi-Fi, right?
God, you're right, man. You're right. I hadn't even thought of that. Well,
yeah. Starbucks is the place to hang out right now. There's nobody there. Oh man!
Oh boy, I'll have to check that out. I pass the Starbucks every morning now. I'll have to check out see if there's a line outside.
Well, you can. You know what? I'm going to donate what I just said to you. You can use that freely in your next project. That was a good line. That was a good line. That was a good one. That was a good one. The last strike that went on, which drug on that one, right? And it's you remember we had was it 1 or 2 seasons of repeats, right?
Well, it was 2007, 2008.
Right.
The strike lasted, I believe, about 100 days. Totally, yeah. That whole TV season was cut short and just never existed.
It never existed.
It never existed. Yeah. And that's what gave us all this wonderful reality TV. Which I can't complain about either, because I've had some great experiences with reality TV too. So.
We would have never had Big Brother, right? Yeah. What's that thing? The Island Survivor. Survivor was created because we didn't have writers.
Yeah, and that's basically it.
Yeah, and what most I try to say this as much as I can, because it's just my world, my reality. But Los Angeles, and specifically Burbank, Studio City, Glendale, Sherman Oaks, Encino, Tarzana, Woodland Hills, these are North Hollywood, right? Everybody that lives there is in film or television in some respect, right? Whether it's set design, a driver, catering, sound, editing, actors, directors, screenwriters, all of the assistants and the PAs and the gaffers and the best boys. And how come there's no best girls?
I'm not. It's a good question. I'm not qualified to answer.
How come there's no best girl grip? You can have that line too. You can have that one too.
I'll consider it.
You teach at DePaul. You teach writing at DePaul.
Actually, I'm no longer doing that. Yes, there's been a few changes since the last time we talked. It's been a couple of years since I taught at DePaul.
That's right. You're in Georgia now, so you're not at DePaul South.
Right, and I'm actually in college administration now at the Savannah College of Art and Design, which just happens to have a really robust film program. So I'm still kind of in the right atmosphere. I'm in the right milieu. But the situation has changed.
The question is still the same, though. What do you tell students about situations like this? Like the writer's strike and production getting shut down, because that's part of film and television. It's not all, being a host of Entertainment Tonight on the red carpet, for the Oscars. It's not all glamour, and there are realities here too as well. Do you talk to them about stuff like this?
Well, I haven't been teaching anybody during the course of this current strike, and I wasn't teaching anybody back in 2007 during the last strike. So I haven't really been in a situation where I've had to explain it to any students. But if I was, I think I'd have a pretty easy time making the case that This is unfortunately a necessary part of the business. We don't work in a vacuum. We may feel like we're in a vacuum when we're doing the writing, but at some point that writing has to go to somebody else. And as soon as that writing leaves your hands, it may change. Somebody may rewrite you. There may be a strike, and you'd be in a situation like mine where you have to call the producer back and say, please send my script back to me. That's the reality of working in this business. And, the hope is that we all maintain our belief that it's worth this struggle. I certainly feel that way.
The other part of this is the union side of things is strong, and if the networks and production companies, movie studios, went out and hired non-union writers, right, and brought them in to keep a show moving forward, and then the strike ends and the old writers come back. Now, is that part of reality? Is that something that the Writers Guild speaks about, and in a what if, in a worst case scenario?
It's dealt with in those rules I mentioned earlier. I don't remember exactly what they have to say about that because that part of the rule book didn't apply to me, so I don't know if I even read the whole thing.
Right.
But the situation you're presenting, yeah, it could happen. It's very unlikely because anybody who did work as a scab would never be able to join the Writers Guild. If they were working as a scab while we were on strike and the strike ends and everything sort of goes back to normal and writers are rehired or added to the payroll, anybody who worked during the strike, like I say, they have kissed any chance of being a member of the guild goodbye.
Yeah,
they're pretty strict.
And here's the other part, right? So they bring in the scabs, and the Simpsons continues, right? I'm using that as an example, and the audience reacts, "Wow, man, the Simpsons got really good." Right? It's funny. Again. It's funny again. I'm really enjoying it. That's the other part of it,
It's quite a hypothetical.
It's quite the hypothetical. I recently I want to talk about J. Allen Hynek, and we're going to talk about Star Trek. I'm not going to talk about. I want to talk about Star Trek Discovery. Have you watched it?
I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen quite a bit of it. Yeah,
it's really good. It's really good.
It is really good. I love the main character, Michael. I think she's one of the best Star Trek characters
strong
we've seen.
Yep. Good storyline. It's really well done. I just wanted to mention that really quick. There's so many versions of Star Trek out there, and you have to, it's a time management thing, right? But to keep up on all of it is a lot of work, and the stories are so deep, right? The storylines and how things are going on.
Yeah.
But I did take the time to watch everything from Star Trek Discovery. And it grabbed hold of me. I just happened to watch the first episode of season 1. I went, okay, hold on a minute here. I think we got something. And it just turned out to be really, really good. Now let's talk about current events. With everything that you have been doing in your life with your research on the UFO subjects, and then you find and science fiction in general, right? And suddenly, especially over the last 5 years, we have found ourselves firmly planted in science fiction, like never. This was stuff that people wrote about, right? This was stuff that and it's got a lot of the world saying this stuff is real. Okay, this UFO thing, did you ever imagine us getting to this point?
Well, I'm not sure what point we've gotten to be honest, Jimmy. Absolutely. Has progress been made in terms of public awareness? Yeah. Has progress been made in terms of people being more open to talking about the phenomenon and thinking about the phenomenon? Yes, absolutely. Are we any closer to the disclosure event? I'm not so sure. I go against the grain in a lot of ways with a lot of the conventional thinking in UFO world. Um, yeah, this this gets tricky. This gets tricky. So yeah, like I said, I think awareness has increased, but for me, I just can't really get too excited about these things or buy into them. Um, because my bottom line is this something that's going to um, add to my understanding of the phenomenon? And if it is, then sure, I'll dive right in. But if it's not, I tend to just stand on the sidelines and just let it play out. And I think a lot of what we've seen over the last couple of years falls into that category. I don't find it convincing. I find a lot of flaws in the thinking behind it, and I don't feel like it's going to help me to understand the phenomenon any better. So, like I said, I'll step aside and just sort of keep a watch on things, keep abreast of the latest news, but I don't necessarily believe that we're really going anywhere with any of this.
Well, the average citizen of the world, right? Citizens of Earth,
Mhm.
when you've got Washington, D.C. suddenly addressing this issue
Mhm.
in public forums,
Yeah.
at the Department of Defense and Fox and the New York Times, the average citizen is stepping back and taking it seriously because of that.
Yeah.
Where our community will react in their own way, the UFO community,
That's
and
well.
that's fine. But everybody, that's the part of it where they need that, right? They need Washington D.C. to be speaking about this. They don't necessarily need to know the history of Betty and Barney Hill or Roswell, right? Or J. Allen Hynek. Right? They don't have to know about NICAP or Blue Book. But if they're hearing about it from Tucker Carlson, then that's a whole other thing, and I think that's a big deal.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what you have to say. But again, I can't get excited about news like, well, so and so signed this document. Well, so and so sat in on this meeting at the Pentagon in 1963. Blah blah blah. Stuff like that. Just I don't know. I wish I could explain it better. I just have some sort of mental block with where stories like that are concerned. Like I said, if it's helping me understand the phenomenon better, great. But if it's not, I'm not going to get too wrapped up in it. And frankly, I think a lot of what we've seen over the last couple of years just doesn't cross that threshold with me.
Is it the same? You sound like, okay, we were talking about this earlier. It's a good time to bring this up. You kind of sound like J. Allen Hynek in 1977.
Well, that's flattering. And in all truth, writing his biography did affect my approach to the phenomenon. So you're actually spot on with that observation.
It's he was. I'm not suggesting that you're pissed off. Maybe you are.
Maybe really. I mean, I
but you know where I'm going with this, and it seems like the UFO community and the awareness and the investigations and the government and the military, and it has been a vicious cycle, right? It has been repeating itself for the last 80 years. And if you're a student of this history, you see that we're going through the same things that Hynek wrote about in 1977, and we went through it in 1980, we went through it in 1990, 94, 95. These different cyclical major things happen, and we just keep going back to to square one, Is that just history again repeating itself?
Yeah, I believe it is. I believe it is. I think we've seen it all before. We've done it all before. We've had God knows how many smoking guns that have played through this same cycle in the media and in UFO research circles. And yeah, it gets kind of old and it gets kind of tiring. And if you have I think if you have a good historical perspective on the phenomenon, it helps you to understand what's going on now, and it helps you to see that yes, this does seem to be a bit of a cycle.
Yeah, well, and to your point, the awareness got so big.
Mm-hmm.
And so many came into this community, through social media and networks and so forth, came into this community thinking that disclosure was going to happen in a day or two. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is 5 years after the the famous front page story on the New York Times. Right. The Pentagon has a secret UFO program. And that really raised the awareness. But those that are new to the community don't have a historical perspective. They don't understand what we have been through before in this community, right?
Yeah, they sure don't. And in some ways, maybe that's a good thing. Come at it with a fresh set of eyes that are unbiased. When I was writing my book, my guiding principle in writing The Close Encounters Man was I wanted to write a UFO book that you didn't have to hide from people, like in your beach bag. And I considered that a worthwhile goal. I think to a certain degree I achieved it. I think it's very important that people be allowed to talk about and speculate about UFOs without fear of ridicule. One of my favorite J. Allen Hynek quotes is, "Ridicule is not part of the scientific method, and the American public should not be taught that it is." And those are kind of the words I live by. If we're talking about UFOs, it's got to be a ridicule-free zone, and I think that's become more common. To your point, it's become more common. It's easier to talk in public about the phenomenon. There's much less fear, I think, of reprisal or ridicule or sarcasm. It's still out there. We all know that. But I think that has gone down, a few notches over the last several years.
With let's start at the beginning with Hynek. Well, his UFO beginning, I should say. Project Grudge. He got involved. That's where we kind of first to understand his name and hear about him back with Project Grudge, which we're talking about the late 1940s. You just mentioned Close Encounters, and so many associate J. Allen Hynek, with Blue Book, but more of a modern context and things. But it goes back much farther than that, doesn't it? How did they find him for Grudge?
Well, first, I just want to correct one thing. It actually started with Project Sign.
Sign.
Yeah, and then Project Sign turned into Project Grudge, and then Project Grudge begat Project Blue Book.
Right.
As to how Hynek got involved, it goes back to World War II. During World War II, pretty much every able-bodied scientist, physicist, astronomer, anybody who had a pulse, any scientist who had a pulse basically got sucked into the war effort. And Hynek was no stranger to that. He was pulled into a project to develop a new type of fuse for guided missiles, and that was ended up with being used with the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A radio fuse that would send radio waves out in ahead of the missile, and they would bounce back, and you could set the missile to detonate at a certain distance from the target. So all of a sudden we could control actually where our missiles exploded, and it resulted in a lot of saved lives on our side and a lot more fatal hits on their side. So Hynek was involved in developing this technology for World War II, and he was actually in charge of, because this all had to do with radio waves, that was kind of his area of expertise when he was on this team. So fast forward a few years, all of a sudden the Air Force has this UFO problem. Ever since Kenneth Arnold, everybody's been seeing strange things in the sky and reporting them to the local police department or the local Air Force base, and all of a sudden the Air Force has got this embarrassing problem of trying to reassure the country that this isn't a threat, while also acknowledging that they actually have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what we are dealing with. So the Air Force has got this problem. They're trying to explain these sightings away to calm down the American public. They decide that they need to have a credible scientist on part of their team to validate their findings. They approached a number of different scientists. I don't know the names of them, but they got turned down by everyone they talked to. They ended up finding this mild-mannered astronomer who lived just up the highway, because Project Sign at the time was headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Hynek taught in Ohio. So they go visit Hynek at the Ohio State University, and they say, "Hey, have you heard about this UFO thing?" And Hynek says, "Yeah, it seems kind of silly to me." He said, "I think it's just people worried about another Pearl Harbor, so they're just imagining things. I don't think it's really a threat." So that's where Hynek comes into it, and the Air Force says, "Well, we'd like to, because you already have top secret clearance because of this work you did on the proximity fuse in World War II, you're a nice, easy fit to our group at Wright-Patterson. We'd like to have you, just drive down to Wright-Patterson a couple days a month, go through our stacks of UFO reports, and help us to decide which ones are actually just misidentifications of comets and meteors and the planet Venus and the star Arcturus. If you could clear that up for us, that would be a huge help." And Hynek just felt like, okay, I'm just kind of an innocent bystander, but, it sounds like easy money. So he takes the job and he starts going down to Wright-Patterson a couple times a month, and he gets the latest stack of UFO reports dropped in front of him on his desk. And he starts going through them, and, he's got his star charts and his immense knowledge of heavenly bodies. And it's really easy for him to go through these reports and say, "Yeah, this is a sundog. Yeah, this is just a reflection off of an airplane. Yeah, this is just a comet." So Hynek's able to explain about 80% of the cases. And at that point, he's still very new to this. He's not taking it very seriously. And he's actually very pleased that he's able to explain away 80%. He thinks he's doing really well. He thinks he's earning his paycheck with the Air Force, basically, right? Well, after Project Sign closes, it turns into Project Grudge. Hynek is actually not involved with Project Grudge. He just went back to teaching for a while and kind of forgot about the UFO thing. Then a couple of years later, the Air Force comes knocking on his door again and says, "Hey, we need to keep dealing with this UFO thing, and you're the only guy we can find, basically, who was involved last time. So, would you come back and work for us again?" Once again, Hynek just feels like, well, sure, that was like the easiest job in the world, easy money. So Hynek goes back to work for them, starts commuting back to Wright-Patterson a couple times a month.
And what year
And
was
guess what he finds?
50, well, this was 51.
No, I think we're still in the late 40s. We're only like 1948, 1949.
Okay.
So he goes back to work. He starts going back to Wright-Patterson and going through the UFO files, and lo and behold, he finds he's coming up with the exact same ratio. He can explain 80%, and he can't explain the remaining 20%. Just like with Project Sign a year or two earlier. So now he's got a pattern. To a scientist, that's like, hey, I'm paying attention to this. I see a pattern here. Why do we have this consistent 20% of these sightings that we can't explain? Maybe there's something going on there. That was just enough to pique Dr. Hyneck's curiosity to get him interested in looking deeper into the phenomenon. It's not as though, I mean, we like to say, and even I do this sometimes too, we like to say that, well, Hynek changed his mind, he had a, he reversed course, however you want to describe it. It wasn't really that dramatic. It was just more of a, hey, I'm noticing something weird in this data. I think it bears a closer inspection. That's how he got into it.
And so Project Grudge, okay, so 1950. And I am sure that I can't wait to hear your answer on this, but nobody expected what was going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years when it came to UFOs and headlines and sightings around the world and here in the United States, and what was about to happen. They were still 2 years away from 1952 and Washington, D.C., which was, a very crazy event. Was he aware of it, or did he think that this was going to remain mainly a government program and he was going to assist on identifying this, but where it wouldn't consume, the population and pop culture and the media and the newspapers and the radios and everything else that happened over the next 2 or 3 years? Was he aware of that?
Oh, he was definitely aware. He was also very surprised. He really seriously thought, and I think it was a reasonable thought. He really seriously thought that people were still paranoid after the sneak attack at Pearl Harbor. In those years, late 40s, early 1950s, all of a sudden we had to worry about intercontinental missiles being launched from Russia, flying over the North Pole, and bearing down on the United States. That was a very real threat and a very real fear among the American public. And if the public lost faith in the Air Force in that context, that would not be a very good thing for the Air Force at all. And unfortunately, a lot of people did start to lose faith in the Air Force because of their ridiculous approach to these UFO sightings, trying to explain everything away as a hoax or a mirage or a mistaken identity. So Hynek was aware of all this, and he was a willing participant. I mean, he was very happy to do this work for the Air Force. Like I said, it was extra money for him. It was fairly easy work because to him it was like elementary. It's so easy to tell what these things are that people are reporting on. So yeah, he knew about it. But this was also his transition period, right? He had, like I said, he had that revelation about the 20% of unsolved cases that really hit him like a hammer. And then he started sort of paying closer attention to those tough cases, the cases that he couldn't explain, and he would sort of set those aside and try to get back to them later because, he really started thinking seriously, well, this is a scientific problem. It calls for a scientific investigation, which means we need to start collecting, data about the phenomenon so that we can actually start studying this. And he had this one handicap. How do you study something that's here one second and it's gone the next? And so, Hynek would say, we can't study a tornado while it's happening. We can only experiment with what's left behind after the damage is done. He's like, UFO cases are the same way. We never get a chance to actually get our hands on them. All we can really study is what happens afterwards or what they've left behind. So that was the situation Hynek found himself in. Does that sound self-contradictory? Yes, very much so. He was still wrestling with a lot of doubts.
It's the same thing we're wrestling with still today, and it's 2023.
Yeah.
In the TV show Project Blue Book, which I 100% thoroughly enjoyed, and I also 100% thoroughly enjoyed the artistic license, right? Okay, so I've talked to Paul about this. I've talked to others about this. Talked to people that worked on the show about this. So entertainment's entertainment. I was fully entertained by the show. But here's the thing. Okay, I'm not saying that J. Allen Hynek witnessed alien bodies growing in tubes, or whatever, underground secret bases, or got shot at while he was in a P-51 Mustang, or whatever was dramatized in the show. I'm not saying that. But what the show did point out in those instances where he witnesses something, he sees something, he's a part of something, but then he's told to say something else, to lie about it, to say something else. And that was one of the complex things psychologically and personally that he had to deal with, right? Where the data and the evidence is saying one thing, but he is told to do another. And he had to deal with that, didn't he?
Yeah, he had to deal with that for the entire, nearly 20 years that he was employed by the Air Force as their UFO consultant. He absolutely had to deal with that on a regular basis. I don't share your feelings about that TV show or the artistic license. I'm going to have to completely disagree with you there. But look at it from my point of view. I've just spent the last couple of years researching this guy's life, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about him and his work.
Right.
And I put all this work into trying to correct his story so that people would understand the real Hynek. And here this show comes out that just throws out everything factual and makes everything up.
I know. Look, Mark, trust me. Trust me. I'm watching. I'm just like, oh, come on. Really? Are you doing this? Are you really doing this?
Yeah, I'll just say Mimi Hynek was never seduced by a lesbian Russian agent. That never happened.
I asked Paul. I go, hey, Paul. Right? I think I did it on the air. I did it on the air.
I tell you what, though. Hynek disinformation. I'll just throw this in because this reminds me of when I was researching the book and writing the book. I had to deal with a couple of strange situations, and one of them was this guy contacts me out of the blue. I've never heard of him before. He claims that he worked for Dr. Hynek at his Center for UFO Studies for several years in like the early 1980s. And he says, I just think you need to know this part of the story. He goes, when J. Allen Hynek moved down to Arizona in the early 1980s, his wife did not come with him. J. Allen Hynek moved to Arizona with a young co-ed that he was teaching at Northwestern University. He said, I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I've never heard that story before. Can you give me some validation? Is there someone else I can talk to who can validate the story? And guess what? Of course, he couldn't. And I'm kind of like, well, I'm not putting it in my book. You can't validate it. I talked to several of Hynek's long-term colleagues and ran that story past them, and they all basically laughed their asses off. So that is absolutely not true. So stuff like that does happen. But with the TV show, it was, over the top.
Did you talk to Paul at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had a couple of really nice long interviews with Paul. He told me the parts of the book where you sort of get a glimpse of their home life. That's all from my interviews with Paul. He told me some really wonderful stories, and I really appreciated how much he was willing to share with me for the book. It was really great.
Yeah, Paul's really open about all of it, and I asked Paul. I did ask him about the Russian lesbian lover seduction thing, and I said, "Are you okay with that?" Because, man, I'm not in control of it. It sure is funny though, and it's okay, all right, it's drama. If it was my mom, I don't know how I would have reacted, but what can you do? You can't do a whole lot about it. But this is the thing that I asked Paul about, and about his dad. I said, because Paul is he's super smart. He's like ridiculously intelligent, but his sense of humor and his timing of comedy he may be a professor of whatever at Pepperdine and doing his thing right now, but he may have missed his calling. He could have done stand up. I'm not kidding, right? He's
That's
that
great.
good.
I love that idea.
And I said to Paul, I said, where did you get that? Paul and I were at a bar somewhere and we're goofing around. And this particular day we were wearing the same dress shirts. I mean, like these custom, and I was like, dude, what? I almost went up to my room and changed. We had the same brand, same color dress shirt, and we're sitting together. And anyway, so we were laughing about that. And I said, where'd you get your sense of humor, man? Seriously. He said, my dad. And really? Now, in your research, did this comedic side of J. Allen Hynek ever surface?
Sometimes, yeah. I would say he, as far as I could tell, he was a little bit guarded about it for fear of not being taken seriously.
Right.
But I was told one joke that Hynek loved to tell. I'm not going to repeat it here because it's incredibly racist. It was a real product of its time. It made me laugh, but as it made me laugh, I also was realizing that yes, this joke is very inappropriate. But here's the other side of it, though. He kept a file of newspaper cartoons that made fun of him, and that's what I thought was really interesting. Not only did he have a good sense of humor, he had a good sense of humor about himself. You know, he was able to laugh at himself. And when these, he had a huge binder just filled with newspaper clippings with cartoons about UFOs and about him. And he cherished those cartoons, He thought they were funny. I think he was actually really proud of the fact that he had collected all these cartoons poking fun of his work. He really enjoyed it.
I have mentioned on the air probably once a week over the last year his book from 1977, all right, the report on UFOs and Project Blue Book, and how much I regret I had read it years ago and just kind of put it away. And it didn't hit me like it hits me now. Now it's one of my reference guides. I am constantly pulling it up, and it's not the historical perspective and on specific cases that he points out in the book that he had trouble with over the years is extraordinary in of itself. But there's a philosophical thing that is going on with the book. And I need that balance, right? And I get that from it. But the book was written in 1977. It's almost 50 years old. And he died, like 8 years later or something like that? He died 84. In the early 80s, 84, 85, something like that.
86.
They're 86. Yeah, that sounds right. So was it a book that he felt a need to write?
Oh, yeah.
Like a deathbed confession. He wasn't dead yet. You know what I mean? But that's almost what it was, where he needed to philosophically, right, find that balance, that existential fight that he had been dealing with for so long. And the book is an angry book. Do you get the same thing? He had gotten to that point in his life.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. He and I like to put it in the context of his first book, The UFO Experience, which is all about the human factor. In that first book, The UFO Experience, he talks a lot about the human factor, how a UFO event affects a person. How does it affect them mentally, emotionally, spiritually? That book is really, really fascinating in that regard. So that was the first book. That was, I think, 1973. The next one you're talking about, the Hynek UFO report, 1977. totally different approach to the phenomenon. The second book was really like, I'm going to tell you how bad Project Blue Book really was. That's really what that book is to me. And that's what he does. He goes through for, I don't know how many hundreds of pages long that book is, but he basically eviscerates Project Blue Book, says, this is what they did wrong. This is how they should have done things. This is how I would have done things. And if I had been allowed to do things my way, we'd be in a much different place than we are right now. So yeah, that book is, both of those books are to me, they're companion pieces. I think they should both be read together. And they're just amazing insights into a brilliant mind, but also a really mind-expanding view of this phenomenon. I love those books.
He says in the very beginning of the report, 1977, I don't know if it's like page 1 or 2 or the forward or whatever, but in the very, very beginning of the book, he says I'm paraphrasing, of course. He says, the one thing that we needed to do then, we still need to do now, is we need science. We have to apply the science. We never did, and we're not doing it now. That's the exact same argument we're having in 2023. Yeah. It's the same statements coming from Avi Loeb. And these were words written by J. Allen Hynek in 1977, who was part of Project Sign and Grudge and Blue Book and researched everything for the Air Force until 1969. I mean, things don't change, it appears. So was he yelling about science in 1952? Was he the only scientist there? Was it nothing but, the military and 3-letter agencies around him that he was fighting, and he was the only one trying to apply the scientific method?
Well, yes and no. You had mentioned before what an important year 1952 was for the UFO phenomenon. It was also important. 1952 was also important because that was the year in which Hynek sort of came out from undercover and publicly called for a scientific look, a scientific approach at the UFO phenomenon, and he made this plea in front of a convention of fellow scientists. It was a 1952 meeting of the American Optical Society, and Hynek was one of 3 speakers at this conference. The first 2 speakers, one of which was Donald Menzel, who
I know, yeah.
A lot of us know as like the number 1 UFO bad guy of all time. So one of the professors was Donald Menzel. Can't remember who the second one was, but the third one was J. Allen Hynek. And nobody knew who Hynek was in 1952. Everybody knew Menzel. He was a big wheel in the scientific world. Everybody knew the other guy. He was also a big wheel. But then Hynek comes up on stage. Nobody really knows who he is. He's this junior professor from Ohio. Nobody really knows what he's going to say. And he gets up on the dais and he starts saying, "Hey folks, this is for real. Those first 2 talks you just heard, those guys need to put a lot more thought into how they're approaching this, because their approach is all wrong. We can't approach it in such a dismissive style." He said and so again, 1952, Hynek comes out from undercover, goes public with his belief that a scientific study is needed for us to understand this. And it goes, outside of that gathering of scientists, it goes largely unnoticed. And I want to really emphasize, Hynek was really, really taking a chance here. Like I said, he was just this junior professor from Ohio State. Nobody knew who he was. And he gets up at this convention and he says, "Those 2 scientific heavyweights you just heard from, they're wrong." Can you imagine the courage it took for Hynek to get up there and say that? It's just amazing.
Well, and out of frustration. And so back to the reason why I asked that. Did he feel that he was a man on his own island, right? And he wasn't getting that support. You can be in his case, astronomy and get into astrophysics and understand a star chart, which he did. But the other part of it, you need assistance, you need other people, you need other input, you need to apply. There's just so much work to do, and that there wasn't any computers. This was a manual job back then. And and he must have, just out of frustration. So he was, like I said, he was surrounded by everybody else that was non-scientific, right? And he was the only one at Right Pat that had the scientific background.
Yeah, but he also worked to change that, because he definitely felt the way you're describing. He wasn't getting any support from the scientific community, but he needed somebody to support him in this. So he did end up in different ways sort of finding talented people who understood what he was talking about, who were willing to work with him on this. One of those was Jacques Vallée, who, it's a name I'm sure all of us recognize. One of them was Jacques Vallée. There were a couple other people who sort of entered Hyneck's orbit as he was teaching at astronomy at Northwestern University. In fact, I'm glad this has come up, because I do have a new project that I wanted to talk about. I've started a series of Substack articles called UFO Legends, and it's all about interview material that I have from when I wrote my book that didn't make it into the book. I had thousands of words, hundreds of pages of really fun, amazing UFO lore and UFO data that there just wasn't room for it in the book. And I've been sitting on all this material. We just, last week, we celebrated the 6th anniversary of my book being published. So for 6-year anniversary. So for 6 years, I've been sitting on all this unused material from all these people who very few people know about. So I'm posting these interview transcripts on Substack as UFO Legends. And the first two I've done are two people who are what we're just talking about. They're people that Hynek they entered Hyneck's orbit at the University of Ohio and then at Northwestern. Started working with him closely because they just found him so fascinating and convincing, and ended up, being part of his invisible college. So the first one of those people is this woman, Jenny Zeidman, who was a student of Hyneck's at Ohio State, and then became his teaching assistant, and then became basically an assistant Blue Book investigator. That's the first one I've posted. Then just last week, I posted part of an interview with this gentleman, William Powers, who played a similar role with Hynek at Northwestern University. Bill Powers was not an astronomer. He was kind of a self-taught electronics genius. So Hynek would need some new hardware for the observatory at the campus, and Bill Powers would sort of figure out how to build it with all the spare parts they had in the lab. So these two were Hynek's first non-Air Force UFO comrades. And they were really, really important, pivotal people in his history and in his development as a researcher. They kind of kept him on the straight and narrow when he got a little goofy and started veering off the path of serious UFO research. They would rein him in and say, no, you got to keep looking at this. So I hope to continue this series on Substack. I have a few more interviews that I'm looking forward to posting. But yeah, those two people, absolutely, Jenny Zeidman and William T. Powers, were Hynek's first real non-Air Force confidants in UFO world. They became really important figures to him.
Jacques, I'm so glad that, not only that Jacques is still with us, but that him and I have become as close as we have over the years, because I've looked up to him, for so long, like all of us have. And I've had the opportunity to literally spend hours and days with Jacques alone, and just sit and just talk about some of the strangest things, everything from food to levitating stuff with your eyeballs, so, and everything that's in between. And but it's so important that Jacques Vallée is a part of this story, and his friendship with Hynek, which he's very open about, right? He's but I've asked Jacques I asked Paul Hynek the same question that I'm about to ask you. I said to Jacques and I said to Paul, same question. Did Hynek know the secrets? That's it. Did he know? And both of them have answered, I don't know. Maybe. What do you think about that? Do you think that he was exposed, and do you think he knew the secrets?
I think, and this is just my opinion, I think that he knew there were secrets, but he didn't know what they were. Or if he did, he only knew maybe just one small portion of the secrets, not enough for him to actually, build a theory or a belief system around. But yeah, I think he was not privy to the secrets. And I think that bugged the hell out of him for a whole lot of his career. The fact that he at times seemed so close. And one of the things that Paul said to me when I interviewed him for the book was, he bit off something bigger than he could swallow, but he did swallow a little of it. He got a little of it. He didn't get everything. He didn't get the full solution to the UFO enigma, but he got a little of it.
The feeling that I get when I read the book from 1977, and I only say that because you're right. There's two books, and I'm talking about book number 2. You get the feeling in there where he's talking matter of factly here that UFOs are real. They're not of this earth. This is ET that we're talking about, and these are the reasons why. Boom, 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 boom. The book is not hypotheticals or theories. It's just not about that. And if there's ever been something that, like I said, almost like a deathbed confession, right? I think it's this book. That's the way that I interpret it. I use it as, it's like an Encyclopedia Britannica. It's a desk reference.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, the way I look at it is, that book, the Hynek UFO Report, is everything he wanted to say for the 20 years he was with Blue Book. Everything he wanted to say but couldn't he was just letting it all loose all at once in that book. He was like, this is all the stuff I've been keeping inside for 20 years. This is all the crap I've been dealing with. I'm going to put it all in this book, and you can judge for yourself.
Before we head to the break, I want to stay chronologically in a linear fashion. Okay, so we kind of stopped around 1956 or so, and we'll come back to that after the break. I'm going to jump ahead to the 60s for a second, because we were just talking about Jacques Vallée, and that's Socorro. Okay, and I think that Socorro, did it change J. Allen Hynek like we think that it did? Was that a turning point in his life?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that whole story fascinates me. I love the Socorro case. I personally find it very convincing. Hynek found it very convincing. The gentleman I was just telling you about, William T. Powers, who worked with Hynek at Northwestern University at the observatory, Hynek sent Bill Powers to Socorro to investigate the landing site and to talk to Alani Zamora. That's one of the things that's included in this Substack I'm doing, UFO Legends. He talks about that. And yeah, Socorro, the Air Force mishandled it so badly. Not only was Hynek, he found the evidence and the witness completely credible, but he also found the Air Force's attempts to explain it just completely laughable. So it's kind of this 1-2 punch. He's like, the Air Force is like flailing around trying to come up with some stupid explanation for what Officer Zamora saw, and they're just failing miserably. And Officer Zamora is not playing ball with the Air Force at all. He was sick of them.
Or the FBI.
Or the FBI. He was sick of them. So Hynek shows up. He gets there a little late because, get this, so Project Blue Book ordered Hynek to fly from Chicago to Albuquerque. And then at Albuquerque, an Army staff sergeant was going to meet him with an Army car and drive him down to Socorro. So Hynek gets picked up by this guy. They get about halfway to Socorro, car gets a flat tire. They pull over to change the tire. Car doesn't have a spare tire in it. They are SOL in the middle of nowhere in the New Mexico desert, you know, on this deserted highway, and they've got a flat tire and no spare, which to me is so emblematic of how the Air Force was functioning with UFO stuff. Of course, the car didn't have a spare tire. It's the Air Force. Yeah, I went off on a little tangent there, didn't I? But I just find that story so funny and so perfectly illustrative of how this whole dynamic worked.
Jacques and I spent a lot of time talking about this case, and I could have this wrong. Okay, I could have this wrong, but I believe this. Jacques said he was with Hynek when the phone call came in about Socorro. They were together, and Hynek got on the plane the next day. And Jacques almost went with him and didn't. I believe, if I have the story right, okay, he's got a French accent and I don't listen that well. Plus, we were, you know, doing that kind of stuff. But Jacques said Socorro changed him. Man, he said that was the one thing, and still is just a huge mystery, because Hynek did everything that he could to debunk that case, to pull it away from ET, NASA lunar lander testing, right?
That's a joke.
What was the MIT of New Mexico, right? New Mexico State or whatever. Kids playing pranks, whatever. What they did he threw everything at that case, trying to do, you know what I mean, to get it off of ET, and he just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, again, back to his assistant, Bill Powers, when he sent Bill Powers down to investigate Socorro. Powers went to the landing site. He saw the 3 impressions made by the landing gear. He saw the charred bush where the exhaust from this craft had burned it. And the way he explained it to me was, he said, you know, I took measurements. I looked at this thing from every angle, every possible angle. And he said, I wasn't really convinced, but then I noticed, wait a minute. He said, these landing pad marks and this spot where the bush was burned, he said that burn spot is exactly where it would need to be the center of gravity between those 3 landing impressions. I'm not saying it as well as he did. I'm maybe getting the details a little bit wrong, but that was the thing that convinced William Powers. He looked at the evidence on the ground and said, you know what? That's exactly how it should look, and that's how it does look. And now I believe that there actually was something that landed here. I thought that was a very, very cool story, and it almost gives me shivers just telling that story again.
Let's take our break right here, Mark. You just stay right there. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We'll be right back. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Please visit all of our sponsors. We're taking a quick break here. All of the links are below. We'll be right back. Join us November 10th, 11th, and 12th, 2023, as Disclosure Fest Foundation and Fade to Black Radio presents Stairway to the Stars, a Human Origins Science and Technology Expo, live at the Luxor Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip, with live talks, lectures, and workshops by world-acclaimed researchers and authors. This is Jimmy Church, by the way, and I'll be your host all weekend long, featuring topics like human origins, ancient technologies, indigenous teachings, workshops, a mass meditation, yoga and sound healing, music, and so much more. Don't miss our intimate sky watch and meteor shower over the infamous Area 51 airspace in Rachel, Nevada, with special surprise celebrity hosts guiding us through the night. Also introducing our Disclosure Fest VR Starship area with dozens of rides. You've got to check it out. This event will sell out. For more information and tickets, please visit disclosurefest.org. The secret is out. Wave X39 is the reason why I have got my vision back. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you need to go straight to healingworksnow.com. That's healingworksnow.com. Works with an X. All of the information that you need is on that portal. Find out why I look great. I feel great. I'm thinking clearly. I sleep. I dream. Life is good. All of it. You've got to check out Waves X39 and all of their other products. It's all simple to do. Go to healingworksnow.com. That's healingworksnow.com. Works with an X.
Hey everybody, it's Billy Carson, also known as Forbidden Knowledge. I want to talk to you about a very special event coming up July 30th, 2023, the Forbidden Conscious Awards. We're going to honor people who have been contributing to the conscious community for decades. People that you know and love that have helped you get to higher levels of thought and consciousness and awareness. It's going to be a live in-person event, but seats are going to sell out very fast. You want to make sure you're there in person, and guess what? You can help vote for the winners. Voting is available on forbiddenknowledge.com, and the categories are going to be social media influencer, podcast/radio host, TV host, actor, director, producer, entrepreneurs, health and wellness, philanthropists, authors, field researchers, archaeologists, space anomaly hunters, and of course, a Lifetime Achievement Award. I'll be your keynote speaker that night at the Forbidden Conscious Awards. We have celebrity guests performing. We'll have a halftime show where we're actually going to perform music for you. And don't forget about the pre-event mixer, where if you buy a box seat, you'll be in the VIP section, and you also have private access to a VIP mixer with celebrity guests. Shake hands, break bread, network, and then walk the red carpet with us and take amazing photos. It's gonna be a night to remember. You don't wanna forget this. Make sure you hurry up and get your tickets because they're selling out very fast. I wanna see you there. Forbidden Conscious Awards 2023.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. I was delayed. I was reading email. Our guest tonight, Mark O'Connell, talking about the strange UFO life of J. Allen Hynek and other subjects too, as well as Star Trek and his writing for the series. We'll get into that a little bit more too as well. Back to, we were just talking about Lonnie Zamora and Socorro and how that affected J. Allen Hynek. I want to talk about Howard Menzel a little bit. What was the okay? We had two different commissions, two different panels that were put together to, in my opinion, embarrass Hynek and Blue Book and the UFO subject. And he had to go through both of those. And then you have Menzel, who in the background, and by some report, I don't know if Menzel was misinformation and disinformation, if he was playing both sides of the coin. I don't know if Menzel was, MJ12 had, was working with and knew the secrets, but he was turning around and hiding the secrets in public. I know these are dramatic things to say, but there was this relationship because they're both astronomers, right? They're both dealing with this subject. What was their relationship like with each other?
I think you're making a really good point here. I think in my research, I got the feeling, I never found proof, but I would sometimes get the feeling that Menzel was kind of a double agent, like he was playing both sides. I don't know what his motivations would have been for that. It might have been as simple as money. I don't know. And again, I have no proof. I never uncovered any proof, any solid evidence. But there were times when reading through, especially correspondence between Dr. Hynek and Dr. Menzel, you would get this sense that even though when it came to UFOs, they were in violent disagreement, they would butt heads over UFOs all day long, given the chance. Menzel just did everything he could to just kill the whole UFO thing. But at the same time, I would also get the sense in this correspondence that they could really easily shift gears from fighting over UFOs to working together, sharing data on certain astronomical issues or problems that they were both involved in studying. I got this very, very weird image of these two guys who could be just the epitome of professionalism with each other when they were talking about astronomy. But as soon as the subject turned to UFOs, they, like I said, they would be button heads. And you know, the UFO skeptics, like Menzel back then in, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, Menzel, Philip Klass, some of these guys, they were brutal. They were brutal in their attacks on the UFO people, you know. And Menzel was part of that. Menzel could be really, really mean and really brutal when it came to UFO stuff. So yeah, very weird relationship between the two men. But I do agree with you that Menzel, I think there was more going on with Menzel than anybody ever realized. And I don't know if I don't know if I would ever be able to prove that. Also, another scientist, I'll quickly say, who falls into that same group, Carl Sagan.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the thing, Mark. With everybody that we just mentioned, flip-floppers, including Dr. Hynek, right? It's kind of weird. And that's you know who's next? Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's going to flip-flop.
Oh,
I'm going to get him to flip-flop. There's more on that. More on that coming, everybody.
Well, that would be fun.
Is that here's the thing with Menzel. I do so much research and so much reading historically. It consumes me, and I'm just fascinated with it. And it's happened a few times, that's not hundreds of times, but it's happened a few times where I've seen his name pop up in the weirdest of places. And it's like, wait. He's supposed to be a skeptic debunker. Is he, and I have sat back and went, no, really? And so I'm left in the middle. His associations with the CIA, with intelligence agencies. Yeah. Same thing with Philip Klass too, as well. And maybe even Sagan. I hate to say it. Yeah, I know.
Anything's possible. But as far as Menzel goes, though, going back to something we talked about in the first hour, when I mentioned that moment at that scientific convention when Hynek came out from undercover and urged his fellow scientists to take the UFO seriously, one of those previous speakers was Menzel. So, and I believe that was the first time that Hynek and Menzel met. And in fact, oh my gosh, I need to go through my old research notes because I did find some evidence back from that convention in 1952 that there was a secret meeting between Hynek and Menzel. Dang it! I wish I knew where that info was. I'm gonna have to spend some time digging for that, and if I find it, I will let you know.
Yeah,
but I remember, and it was one of those things that I couldn't fit it into the book. It had to go in part because I didn't have like an ending to the story. But yeah, I need to go back over my notes and see if I can find that. Man, that was a really intriguing story.
I think that with everybody, this includes Sagan. The scientific community today, I think, has taken a different approach to this. Where Sagan, even though he's modern, right? Okay, he wrote Contact. But Sagan didn't have the data that we have today. And so it was a different thing where science today definitely understands the numbers now, where used to be a guess, a theory, if there were other planets outside of our solar system. Now, every star in the universe has got at least one planet in the universe, not our galaxy, right? That now it's a numbers game. It is a completely different world. And so it's not really flip-flopping today. It's just the data is there to support things that they didn't have. Menzel didn't have Hynek didn't have this as part of his argument. And Fermi and Enrico Fermi and the Fermi paradox and the Drake equation, all of these things were based on theories and ideas, not data and not the numbers that we have today. So it's a different thing. But Menzel, I don't know, man. I don't know. I think he was playing both sides. I really do. I think
it's a very real possibility. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because this is sort of rekindling some memories from when I was doing the research many years ago.
Now, in all of your research with J. Allen Hynek and what the access, crash retrievals, it is something that is not a part of Project Blue Book. There is historically some military reference to this over the years, but nothing that made it into Blue Book. And it's something that Hynek never really talked about. Yeah. Am I wrong in saying that? Historically, where are we with crash retrievals? Because today, it's like we're about to have hearings in Washington, D.C. about crash retrievals.
Hynek, you're right. Hynek did not want to have anything to do with crash retrieval stories. He wasn't buying it, and he didn't have any. At least in my research, he didn't have any like concrete reason for why he wasn't interested in saucer crash stories. He just wasn't interested. He thought his quote was basically something like, well, I could talk forever about UFO crashes, but that wouldn't be real science. And he said, and I'm not really going to endorse the idea of a UFO crash. He didn't want to say or do anything publicly that would be seen to be in support of the saucer crash narrative.
What and if we look back historically, right, where we have these different into Cape Girardeau, for instance, Roswell, and he was certainly around when the Roswell story broke. We know about Kenneth Arnold, of course, and if you look at the 1956 documentary UFO, which is still one of the great, it's a movie, but documentary. It's weird. You're part of Hollywood. That movie's classified both ways. It's it's kind of weird. They call it a historical documentary. It's in its own class. But anyway, there's no mention of Roswell in that movie from 1956. They talk about Kenneth Arnold, right? He's in the movie, but no mention of Roswell. And as far as I know, J. Allen Hynek never mentioned Roswell ever.
That was another topic that he shied away from. You're absolutely right. He never got pulled into Roswell. And this is something that I did look for. I was on the lookout for when going through his files and his papers, was to specifically see if he ever expressed any opinion about Roswell, and I never found a thing. I never even found, with the saucer crash thing, I found a quote of his where he said, "No, I don't buy into the saucer crash thing." I couldn't even find that much where he was connected with Roswell. I couldn't find a quote where he said, "No, I'm not interested in Roswell." I just found a complete absence of any mention of Roswell from Hynek. The interesting thing is, so after Hynek died in '86, he still had his Center for UFO Research in Evanston, Illinois, was still it's still in existence now in a much diminished state. But very soon after Dr. Hynek passed away in 1986, his comrades at the Center for UFO Studies very suddenly shifted gears and said, you know what, let's get in on this Roswell thing. So I always found that very interesting. So there are some interesting stories about Kufos's involvement with the Roswell case too.
Well, you have Don Schmidt and you know, and others.
And Don was on the board at Kufos, so he was responsible for a lot of that. Yeah.
Speaking of Don and others, Hynek managed to keep a stellar reputation, right there. Anybody that knew him has got nothing but the best of praise about J. Allen Hynek. That's a tough thing to do, not only these days but throughout history.
Yeah, it's he had a lot of respect. And that was one of the things that fascinated me about him as I was researching his biography, was the fact that he had these three careers, the UFO investigator, the observational astronomer, and the educator. These three careers that all sort of intertwined in interesting different ways. And Hynek was very, very highly regarded in the scientific world for his astronomical work. He was very highly regarded. He was responsible for the construction of several important observatories. He was the brains behind a whole lot of projects, like looking for supernovae and looking for binary stars. He did some really amazing and impressive astronomical work, and he's very highly regarded for that. But again, like it was with Menzel, you get this flip side thing. On the one hand, he's highly respected for his scientific work and his educational work, and on the other hand, he's widely ridiculed for his UFO work by the same people.
John Mack. You know, the list is long when it comes. Look at Avi Loeb. You know, he's dealing with the same thing. Now, did Hynek ever question the reputation of Wright Pat and the coincidence, and there are none, the coincidence that Blue Book was based at Wright Pat, where Hangar 18 and where they've been hiding the alien bodies and the crash retrievals was, everything was going on in his backyard. And it just happens to be the research center for UFOs for the United States Air Force, a program that he is a part of. Didn't he ever put two and two together? Wright Pat is mentioned in the Roswell headlines, right? Flown to Wright Pat for, didn't he ever stop and start to add things up?
Not to my knowledge. Again, that's the kind of thing I was looking for when I was digging through his files, and I never found anything pertaining to that. It's kind of surprising when you start doing this research into someone's life, and you don't realize that you have a whole lot of opinions already in your head about this person, and you start doing the research and you find out that a lot of your opinions are dead wrong. That happened a lot when I was researching Hynek's life.
Sure. I can understand that. And the part about Roswell and the lack of that information, especially when it comes to Hynek, that's just a fact of history. I spent the better part of a couple of years researching Roswell between 1947 and 1980. Zero. Not in any movies, not in any magazines, not in any newspapers, not in any books, not in any documentaries. It is not mentioned at all. And as a matter of fact, a pretty effective erase of history, if you ask me. I had one person one time say that there's a mention of Roswell in this book from 1962. Okay, so I get the book; it's not in there. Read every page. And so even that, you know what I mean? Or maybe they just went back and I got a new version of the book and they removed Roswell. All right, I got the second edition. But the point is a simple one. There is no mention of Roswell. You know Long John Nebel, right?
Yep.
Okay, Long John Nebel, 30 million people a night listen to his radio program, The Party Line, which was nothing but UFOs and the paranormal, right? For 30 years out of New York City, WOR. And way before Coast to Coast and everything else. And he had everybody on that show. He had everybody on that show from, Kenneth Arnold, right? Donald Kehoe, with frequent guest, just over and over. He had Arthur C. Clarke on his show in 1958 talking UFOs, right? And alien contact. I've listened to just about every Long John Nebel show that I can from the early 1950s up through the 70s. They never mention Roswell. They talk about every case. It's all on the table. Not one mention of Roswell. It's amazing. It was completely erased from history.
And it didn't resurface again until what, 1970, right? When Stanton Friedman.
1980, yeah.
1980, okay.
Yeah. And so that's why a lot of this isn't surprising to me. How could Kenneth Arnold, right, who has his sighting, and then a month later Roswell happens, and it's, headlines and things, where Kenneth Arnold isn't talking about it? Why isn't Kenneth Arnold, talking about Roswell along with his story? It's just it's a fascinating, it's a fact. It's a historical fact. Roswell disappeared.
And the whole thing about Kenneth Arnold, that intrigues me, the sort of the tail end of the Kenneth Arnold story, because then he got mixed up in that Maury Island episode, which is a real head scratcher. Yeah, that's the thing. There are so many. Okay, this is where I come into this UFO thing. I may not believe all the stories, but I appreciate the entertainment value in these stories. Like Kenneth Arnold getting involved in the Maury Island. That's a crazy story. I'm not saying I believe all of it, but it's a crazy enough story to get me really interested and be like, I want to know more about this. That's sort of how I get pulled into UFO stuff over and over and over again.
Yeah, I forget who, I think it was the publisher of Fate magazine, or Incredible Stories.
Ray Palmer?
What's that?
Was that Ray Palmer?
Ray Palmer.
Oh, no.
So Ray Palmer hears about Maury Island, right? And he calls his buddy, Kenneth Arnold. Says, dude, do you know about this Maury Island thing? Well, I kind of do, yes. Can you put me in touch with them? And that's how Kenneth Arnold got in the middle of that mess. It's just like,
that's a crazy story. He goes from the original UFO witness to suddenly a UFO investigator, and then to send the whole thing over the top, you got the two Air Force guys who die in a plane crash.
I know, with the evidence on board.
Yeah, exactly.
And Kenneth Arnold was wrapped up right in the middle of that because Ray Palmer didn't have a contact up there in Seattle. He had to call his buddy, right? Kenneth Arnold. And it's just, it's like the crazy, you're absolutely right about that. Most people don't know. They'll talk about Maury Island, and it is a fascinating case. It is. It's a crazy case. Kenneth Arnold, the flying saucer guy, right? The guy was right in the middle of it. And we wouldn't have known really about Maury Island if Ray Palmer didn't get involved and start writing about it.
Yeah,
and that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have called Kenneth Arnold. And here's the other thing. His name escapes me right now. There's an FBI agent that was involved with Maury Island in the very, very beginning, who was a character who was also part of the JFK assassination. and his trail leads all the way across the United States. And J. Edgar Hoover and all of these crazy cases. I'll think of his name here in a second. And I forget who plays him in the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, but he was involved with Maury Island. It's like it's just insane. It's insane. It's the same cast of characters. Then here's another case. The Rhodes photographs from Phoenix, which were taken the same July 1947. And I think that those are some of the best UFO photographs in the history of the subject. They're incredible. And so those make the front page of the Phoenix News, whatever, the Phoenix Sun-Times or whatever, the local paper. Air Force shows up at his house and takes the photographs and gone, and has got it's like one of the first Men in Black stories. Okay. But that was also July of 1947. So you had Maury Island, you had the Rhodes photographs in Phoenix, and you had Roswell all within 30 days. Yeah. It's a pretty 1947 was seminal.
Yeah, the first flap, I guess. The first real flap.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. So now if we push this way forward, and because I want to talk about crash retrievals and where we are with that today. But if we go to Close Encounters of the Third Kind and that famous scene, and I love it, Hynek in the background, and we're trading humans for ET.
Yeah, basically.
And so that's going down. The exchange. We're exchanging. We're not trading. We're exchanging. Uh-huh. And there's that scene with Hynek. And I have always felt that Spielberg is in the know. He's kind of like Menzel, right? I think he's a member of 12. But it seems that Spielberg was trying to document and tell us something. And he chose that scene to have Hynek in, right? And Jacques Vallée and Hynek are both a part of that circle, of course, for Close Encounters. It makes me feel that there was a reason for that. Was there a reason to have J. Allen Hynek in that scene in the film?
Yeah, but it's not as interesting as I think you think it's going to be.
I'm not so sure.
All right. Well, I'll tell you the story.
Let me hear your side. Yeah, okay.
All right. Here's the story. So this came about very early when I started researching Hynek's work for my biography of him. I was looking through the Center for UFO Studies files, and I came across the file folder with the letter S on it. And the first two names I saw in the S category were Sagan and Spielberg. I was like, I got to check these files out. So I checked the Spielberg one first. And the first letter is a copy of a painfully polite letter that Dr. Hynek sent to Steven Spielberg saying, "Dear Mr. Spielberg, I understand you're making a new movie, and it has come to my attention that you are using my terminology as the title for your movie. I really wish I would have found out about this from you directly instead of, reading it in a magazine." So Hynek is very politely saying, "Hey, man, you stole my material.
Yeah.
You stole my material. You should have talked to me first."
Right.
And I'm reading this in this letter, this actual letter that Hynek sent to Spielberg. It's like solid gold, this document. And then the next letter is from Spielberg back to Hynek saying, again, being overtly polite, and saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." He goes, "One of my production assistants suggested it as the title. And, I'm having everyone on the production team read your book, The UFO Experience." And he said, "And don't worry, we're not going to use your words for the title of the movie. We're going to call it Watch the Skies." And Hynek was like, "Well, okay, that's cool." So what they ended up doing was Spielberg / Columbia Pictures offered Hynek a contract where they would buy, basically they would buy the rights to dramatize anything in that book, The UFO Experience, for like $1,000. And they would fly Hynek out to the soundstage, and I believe it was in Arkansas or Alabama, where they shot the UFO, Dark Side of the Moon UFO landing base for the movie. So Hynek actually came out, spent 3 days on set, worked as the technical consultant on the film, got paid like another $1,000 for that, and then Spielberg offered to include Hynek in a little cameo scene, which he did. And Hynek's description is really quite funny, because he says these kids who were dressed up like the aliens, they really got into their part, being super curious about things. And he's like, they were, playing with my pipe and sticking it up their nose. And Hynek's like, I'm so glad they cut those parts out of the movie, because it was really dumb. But he's got that 6-second scene where, like you said, he comes walking up through all those scientists and stroking his goatee and fiddling with his pipe. It's a great moment.
It's a good cover story. It's a good cover story.
I like that.
It's a good cover story. There's Close Encounters. And again, going back to the book in 1977, where Hynek gives his reasons and examples for 1, 2, and 3, right? And he does, and that's really cool, and how he came up with the ideas for that. Hence the name, of course, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But I feel that the more that you watch the movie, there is so much from the very beginning, from the flight controllers at Indianapolis Center, and the way that they are dealing with this plane and this unknown, and do you want to file a report, and how that was handled, all the way to Flight 19, right? Of course, and the Jacques Vallée character, Lacombe, and that I think all of this is based on reality, except for the exchange. Are we really dealing with a Project Serpo type of situation? Is this, the Eisenhower agreement and things? I'm not so sure, but I think that the rest of the movie is fairly on point, and I think that we can thank Hynek and Jacques Vallée for so much of that. And the question still remains: was Spielberg in the know? And he has made so many movies about this exact same subject. And that's even putting E.T. on the side. He's done others too as well.
Yeah. It's a really intriguing possibility. I've got to say, it's an entertaining thought to have, but I guess we will just never know. I don't see at this point in his career and his life, I don't see Steven Spielberg having any sort of deathbed confessions, but who knows?
Man, he might. Wasn't Reagan? Was it Reagan that wrote in the letter? We just watched Close Encounters at the White House. It's pretty accurate, right?
Oh, yeah.
Was it Reagan?
That may be Reagan. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. I said it was pretty accurate. Now, what do you make of what we're dealing with this week in the world of UFOs, which includes now Congress? Crash retrievals. Apparently, we've been doing this for a very long time, and we've heard rumors and stories about this in the UFO community forever, right? There's case after case after case after case. For me, one of the best cases that's never talked about is Cave Creek, right there in Phoenix, Arizona, 1958. Crash retrieval right there, and just north of Scottsdale. And so anyway, the reports of this have been going on for a very long time. Now it's in the news. What do you think is happening? Are we about to have a revelation?
I wouldn't be too sure of that. I will be very honest. I have always been very dubious about saucer crash stories, because if you're talking about crash retrieval programs, you are talking about a solid physical objects, the quote nuts and bolts UFO unquote idea. And we don't know that. We don't know for sure that these things are nuts and bolts. We don't know for sure that these are physical manufactured objects. And so we can't say for sure whether they crash or not. That's where I get hung up. And also, I mean, I think of Roswell, I think, you know, I've had this conversation. I mentioned before Jenny Zeidman, the woman who worked with Hynek on Blue Book. When she and I met when we were shooting interviews for UFO Witness for Travel Channel, Jenny sort of took me aside at one point. She said, Mark, what do you think about Roswell? What do you think about Roswell? And I said, well, Jenny, I think it's very possible that something extremely weird happened in Roswell or near Roswell in July 1947. But I said, I think the case has been so contaminated by grifters and opportunists and people trying to make a name for themselves. I think the case has been contaminated so badly over the years that we may never know the reality of what happened or whether anything happened at all. And she just thought about that for a second. She said, I feel that way too. So I felt like I was on pretty safe ground if Hyneck's assistant was backing me up on that. So yeah, I hate to disappoint you. I'm just not big on that. I mean, if it turns out to be true and somebody produces wreckage of a crashed spaceship, I'll be just as excited and happy as anybody else would be. I just don't think it's going to happen. Here's another thing about crash retrievals, and this is the thing that really bugs me. When people start talking about mystery metal, right, that's been recovered from a crash site, the stuff you can crush the metal and it returns to its original shape. If that's what it was made of, then it's not a crash. It's not wreckage. Because if it's made of this memory metal, then it would all return to its original form after it crashed. So how do you reconcile that? So there's my take. People might be angry at my opinion, but that's what it is.
Well, the opportunist around Roswell and other things, sure, 100%. I don't base my thoughts about Roswell on nearly any of that. And I've read every book. I've read so many books on Roswell that I would get a new book and I would start reading it and I would go, I've already read this, right? And I would go back because I hadn't read it before, but it was a regurgitation of information and names. But anyway, I don't base it on that at all. I base it on Hout's original press release. That's it. It's just, if you go and you read the original press release and consider where it originated from, which was Roswell, New Mexico, the absolute heart of the biggest brains on planet Earth, right? Albuquerque, Roswell, the nuclear, Oppenheimer, Fermi, anybody else that you want to bring up was right there. And for the Army to it's the most secret location, right, on planet Earth. It's the most secret location in the Milky Way, right there. To write that press release like they did, I have to take that as true, and that's what I base it on. Now, the cover up and how to deal with the cover up happened the next day for sure, and they decided to handle this in a completely different fashion from that day forward. Hynek talks about this himself, right? And that's what they did from 1947 moving forward. But that original press release stands on its own. Forget about the books and the witnesses and the nurse and the red-headed sergeant and the child caskets and the funeral home and blah, 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 you know. Okay, all right, cool, folklore, awesome. Maybe it's true. I don't know. That press release was approved by Roswell Army Airfield, home of the only nuclear weapons detachment on planet Earth. So that's where I'm at. And why would they fly? It's the basic question of why would they fly little pieces of a weather balloon to Houston and then to Wright Pat? Why? Somebody really wants to look at me straight in the face and say that the people of Roswell Army Airfield didn't know what a weather balloon was? Is that possible? And they've got nuclear weapons there. Is this Monty Python we're talking about? You know, and that's it. That's where I come from. Everything else, you know, but no, that's it. That's where I'm at with it, and I don't think I'm ever really going to change. And you know, and Mark, there's another interesting point about Roswell where I talk about it being erased from history. When the Air Force does their thing, I think it was 1996, Roswell case closed, right? And they do the report and it's released. In that report, they got their own dates wrong. And, you know, it was Project Mogul. It was this. It was dummies, crash test, and which didn't happen for another 4 years after Roswell, right? And then when the GAO, the General Accounting Office, comes out with their report on Roswell, they are told by the Air Force and the Army and the Department of Defense and the Pentagon that everything about Roswell has been destroyed. Right? It's like, what? And that's the GAO, right? There's no phone records. There's no bank receipts. There's no cables. There's no telegrams. There's nothing. There's no memos. There's no copies. There's no reports. There's no write-ups. There's nothing left. All records have been destroyed. Do you really buy that? I don't. We've got historical records going back to the 1700s, right? And that survive. But mysteriously, the only thing that matters right now that the GAO is researching, which is Roswell, that all records about Roswell have been destroyed. And that's the Air Force's words, by the way, and the Army's words. So that's what I base my opinion on.
Yeah, it's making me think of the final scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. That classic image of the government warehouse where all the secrets are kept. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, and that scene is meant as a joke, but I believe it.
Oh, for sure. Now,
yeah, I think everybody believes it.
Now, what do you make of David Grusch, of somebody of his CV, his resume is part of the public record. He's a decorated soldier, intelligence specialist at the NRO, right? If I got it right. Of course, the UAP task force. And for somebody like him to step forward and say, hey, we have intact craft. And one of the things that he said a couple of these craft were found alone, right? That there wasn't any occupants. And this is like very direct. Why would somebody step forward like this and sign off on whistleblower status and absolutely, like you said, ruin his career, right? And any future employment. What do you make of somebody like this coming forward saying, yeah, we do have this and we do have bodies on ice?
I'm going to go back to what we talked about right at the beginning of this talk, which when I said that my litmus test is this new UFO story going to help me understand the phenomenon better? And this story that you're talking about, the answer is frankly no.
Why not?
Again, it's an entertaining story. Well, because to the best of my knowledge, this guy, I have no opinion of him whatsoever. But to the best of my knowledge, the things that he has claimed, the things that he has talked about, he has not seen or touched or experienced any of them firsthand, to the best of my knowledge.
But that's
so
not,
I feel like, well, why should I believe this guy?
But that's not his purpose, and he's never claimed that. His purpose is he's the catalyst now for hearings on Capitol Hill about crash retrievals. He gave the IG and he gave Congress classified documents with names and dates and locations. He's done this. And so his job is complete. You don't have to believe him. That's not the point. The point is he went to the IG, passed along the classified documents, went to Congress, did the same thing, and now we're having hearings about it. That's his job. It's not about, did you see something? He never claimed that, and so and now we've got hearings as a result, and the information finally has been passed on. And I think that's very important.
We'll have to agree to disagree, Jimmy. It just doesn't grab my interest. Again, I have no opinion of the guy whatsoever. I'm not saying he's a liar. I'm not saying he's been misled. I don't know what motivations he might have. I'm just saying that it's just.
Yeah, but I think you and I are looking at this completely differently. I could care less if he has seen something. Doesn't matter to me. That's not why he is important. What is important is that members of the Senate and members of the House are saying, I've seen this. Now we need to have hearings on this. I've looked at the documents, and we have got a situation here that we need to discuss and have hearings about. That's crazy town. And for those elected officials to go on the record and look into a camera and say, yes, I've seen it, and we need to have hearings now. That's insane. And that's his job. That's what a whistleblower does. It's not about presenting a video, or I went to a hangar at Lockheed Skunk Works and I saw the craft myself, and we need to believe that story. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the catalyst of what he has presented and what has motivated Washington, D.C. right now. I think it's crazy. Now, don't you want hearing? Wouldn't you like to see a Godfather moment? Remember the hearings in Godfather, or Howard Hughes, right? And so you've got the CEO of Lockheed Skunk Works sitting there getting grilled by the Senate and having his attorney whisper in his ear, covering up the microphone, right? About crash retrievals. That's where we are. And I'm very interested in this.
All I can say is I believe very strongly that there is a fundamental reality to the UFO phenomenon. I've always said that. But I don't know what that reality is. And I'm not really, and again, in some ways, my opinions were formed by my research of Hyneck's life and Hyneck's work. Hynek was never willing to commit himself to any one explanation for the phenomenon because he felt that would be intellectually dishonest, because we just don't know. And I fall in line with that. I believe it's real, but I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you how. But I don't know enough. I don't know enough to be able to say, yes, I believe it's this explanation right here, or that one over there. I just don't know enough, and I don't know if anyone knows enough to be able to say that. So that's where I come from. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, and Hynek, when he went through Condon and he went through Robertson, right, where it was an absolute deliberate attempt to whitewash and cover up the phenomenon itself.
For sure.
100%. There was no search for the truth there.
No.
It was a deliberate and done with intent to run this in another direction, and he went through that twice.
Yeah. I just think I just feel like we talked about this earlier in the show. We've been down this road so many times before. It's just hard for me to get excited because it always ends up, how many times have we been promised, oh, this is going to be the big one, and then it turns out the next day everyone's twittering, oh, it was just a nothing burger. I'm so disappointed. And we just keep setting ourselves up for that, and I just don't want to play that game.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see how the hearings go. I could be eating my words. I know that.
No, I don't. I would never say that. I would never say that.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
But we're all chasing the same thing. We just want the truth. That's all.
We all want to understand. We all want to understand.
That's all.
We want to understand what it means.
Yeah.
That's a point I want to make too. For me, it used to be, what are these things? What are they? And I've evolved to a point where now I think, what do they mean? That's what I'm interested in. What do they mean? And so all this government, Senate hearings, all that stuff, yeah, that's great. But for me, that doesn't help me understand what they mean. That's all.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much. And again, keep rolling that rock uphill. And after the hearings, I'm going to bring you back. It'll be a different show.
All right. That would be very interesting. I would love to do that. Definitely.
I'll talk to you soon. Hey, good luck on the strike, man. And, we got to put everybody back to work. It affects this town. So good luck with that. And I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
All right. Take it easy. Bye, everyone.
Mark O'Connell and his Substack, markoconnell.substack.com, is below. So the links to that O'Connell Podbean, the links to that are below too as well. And of course, we have them over on social media and over on our website. Tomorrow night, Dennis Stone is with us. America's Stonehenge going down tomorrow night here on Fade to Black. Very excited about that. Dennis is great. And with that, I want to say that Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intros, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or reused anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black of the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Till tomorrow night with Dennis Stone, I want everybody to be safe. Go back, Lee Tappy.